I want to thank you both for being on Daryl's committee. Daryl has worked extremely hard on his particular topic, and he and I feel like I know Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system a lot better now after working with him. I actually had to go and be interviewed by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school systems. What was it, their IRB committee or something? I mean, first time I've ever experienced that. So I know Daryl is excited to have that behind him, and we are absolutely glad for him. Daryl, this is a great opportunity for you. You've done a lot of work on this. You have been very successful with it, and you've persevered, and I've enjoyed working with you. And that said, I want to welcome the committee, and also want to welcome those who are joining us. I think that's your wife who is joining us. Welcome, Mrs. Potts. We're so glad you are going to be a part of this. Welcome, Dr. Gail Whitfield, Gardner-Webb alumni and Gardner-Webb doctor. So we're glad you're here. So at that point, Daryl, I'm just going to turn it over to you. Are there any questions from the committee? I just want to remind our visitors that the committee will do the interactions with Daryl. We'll have an opportunity to talk with Daryl at the end of the presentation and the defense. But again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of Daryl's educational journey. And Daryl, I have enjoyed being your chair and have learned a lot from you, as I hope you have from Gardner-Webb University. So thank you and welcome. Now I'll turn it over to you, Daryl.
All right, thank you, Dr. Stone, and that feeling is mutual. I have learned a lot from Gardner-Webb University. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, so that way we're already ready to transition into the presentation. I would like to first start off by thanking my committee members, Dr. Stone for being my committee chair, putting up with me throughout this process. I do appreciate your leadership. Dr. Bowl, if he joins us, I would like to thank him as well. I would like to thank my other committee members, Dr. Boyle and also Dr. Hushard, for your leadership and pushing me in class. I chose you guys specifically to be on my committee because I gained a lot of knowledge from your class, and I was able to learn a great deal from you through my process and through my coursework. So I do appreciate your support of me as a committee member, and I appreciate you guys seeing this through to the finish line with me, and I'm eternally grateful. We're here today to discuss my final defense. It's around my study on a quantitative study of the avid effect in a large urban school district in the South. All right, and this is our final defense agenda. So I'll give you a moment just to take a look at the agenda. These are the items that we will be running through this process. I would like to go ahead and establish a way of asking questions, and I'm okay with you asking questions as I present the material. And that way we can address those questions in real time. So feel free to interrupt me or just interject, and I'll be happy to address your concern or question. We're going to start off with the introduction. Statement of the problem. So there's a lack of college and career readiness amongst high school graduates in the United States, and this trend has been observed over the last 5 years according to ACT. And also, minorities are underprepared in high schools across America. And personally, I think something should be done about this. I think this is an area that we need to address as educational leaders. And this is the reason why I chose to go in this direction for my study. A potential solution to this lack of college and career readiness can be found in the AVID program. AVID's mission is to prepare all students for college and career readiness and for success in a global society. This is a nonprofit educational program that has experienced success since the early, or actually the late 1990s. It showed success throughout. And I want to see if the AVID program is continuing to show the same type of success in contemporary schools. We can see that, looking at this graphic here, about 80,000 educators are trained annually through the AVID program, and 2 million students are impacted annually as well. But is the program still demonstrating the same level of success? Purpose of the study. I kind of alluded to that in the previous slide, but the purpose of this study is to evaluate the effectiveness of the AVID program in a large urban school district primarily around state assessments in English, math, science, and the ACT. The study also compared graduation rates, discipline, and attendance data from both avid and non-avid schools. Research questions for this study. Research question 1 states, how does student achievement differ on assessments such as the Math 3 end of course exam, the English 3 North Carolina final exam, Chemistry North Carolina final exam, when comparing the results from avid schools and non-avid schools? Our second research question revolves around, how do ACT composite scores and graduation rates differ between avid schools and non-avid schools in a large urban school district in the South? And lastly, our third research question is, how does suspension and attendance rates differ for avid schools compared to non-avid schools? Our theoretical framework. So there are 3 learning theories guiding this research study. We see them here. We have the constructivism theory, we have the metacognitive theory, and we have Marzano's theory of learning. And each of these learning theories directly associate with major components of the AVID program, particularly around student experience in AVID schools, and that has an impact on student learning. Also, metacognitive strategies or high-yielding strategies that are taught to students, and students are able to operationalize those in their practices and actually demonstrate their knowledge and obtaining their knowledge on state assessments, and also how students are assessed, right? So using the NCFE, using the EOC and ACT as major assessments that measure students' comprehension and acquisition of knowledge over time. Theoretical assumptions of the study. And these all revolve around the academic program selected by a school or school district. And in this case, we're talking about the AVID program. The teaching strategies adopted by schools. In this case, we're talking about Wicker strategies, and we'll dive deeper into what Wicker strategies are. And last but not least, growth on state exams and state assessments. And particularly, we're talking about the EOC, North Carolina final exam, and the ACT. Our empirical assumptions, okay? Empirical assumptions revolve around the target population sufficiency. And in doing so, we were able to select 150 students from each sample school. And we were able to generalize this to the larger population of 11th grade students in both AVID schools and non-AVID schools. Also, participating in the AVID program for 3 or more years is a reliable method to determine if a student has internalized AVID best practices and able to turnkey those best practices into performance on state assessments and show growth during the school year. Empirical assumptions continue. Data collected from the school district was valid. There was a process to go through and obtain that data. As Dr. Stone alluded to, we did have to go through a robust process. Nevertheless, we were able to acquire that data, and it was instrumental in determining the results for this study. AVID students have met the criteria for selection into the AVID program, and AVID teachers were effectively trained and consistently exposed students to AVID strategies and methodologies with fidelity. Delimitations of the study. So this purposive sampling method was utilized to select AVID schools and non-AVID schools based on similar demographics. The study sample included schools from one large school district in the South, so therefore these results can't be generalizable to multiple school districts. mainly pertaining to the one school district from which the schools and participants were sampled from. Data was explored only for AVID and non-AVID students in the 11th grade, and only ACT, Math 3 ELC, English 3 NCFE, and Chemistry NCFE data from 2017-2018 was used for the study. Significance of the study. So this study adds value to existing literature on the AVID program's effectiveness, comparing AVID populations versus non-AVID populations, in this case, AVID schools versus non-AVID schools. This study also expands knowledge of the AVID program's effectiveness on outcomes in a large urban school district in the South. And lastly, the study adds research on effective program selection. What are the best programs out here to select as a school district to ensure that our students are obtaining college and career readiness skills, 21st century skills, so that they are not only prepared at the next level, the collegiate level, but also the workforce to operationalize those skills. Chapter 2 is all about our literature review, and it's broken down into multiple sections. Section 1 is all about how students learn, particularly through using culturally responsive teaching practices, creating safe environments for our students, building relational capacity, trust and safety between teachers and students to maximize the student experience, incorporating storytelling, creating a culture of collaboration, kind of goes back to those high-yielding strategies, right? Use of collaborative inquiry strategies as well. So that kind of takes us back to Marzano and the metacognitive theory. Section 2 talks about the development of secondary schools in America, right? And it takes us along this timeline of the Common School movement by Horace Mann back in the 1830s, progressing to the one-room schoolhouses in the late 1800s, shifting forward to the high school movement in the early 1900s, 1910 and 1940, and finally arriving at our contemporary high schools of today in 2020, which look drastically different from those one-home schoolhouses or one-room schoolhouses back in the late 1800s, especially with all of the technology that's in place. .3 is all about American reform efforts to address the achievement gap. And we have a timeline here. Each of these reform acts were signed by presidents or reviewed by presidents. They're a little more, a little less than a decade apart. I'm not sure if that has to do with presidential terms or just the need to change education at the time. But just to go down the list, we have the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in 1965, which was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson. We also have the Equal Education Opportunities Act of 1974, signed by President Richard Nixon. We have a Nation at Risk report that was presented to President Ronald Reagan in 1983. We have the Improving America's School Act of 1994, signed by Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton. We have the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 that was signed by George W. Bush. And then last but not least, we have the Every Student Succeed Act of 2015, which was signed by President Barack Obama. Section 2.4 talks about building college and career readiness in high school students, and it primarily speaks around obtaining these 21st century skills, these 12 21st century skills listed here, and students applying those skills not only in high school, but in secondary schools and also in the career force to optimize their impact in society as citizens. And that's the ultimate goal. We want our students to become better citizens, and these skills will help them do so. Section 2.5 is all about the implementation of the AVID program. And this starts with, what is AVID school-wide? And basically, AVID is school-wide when we have the AVID program running effectively in each of these domains of a school: leadership, systems, instruction, and culture. And if AVID is evident in each of these areas, then we have an effective school-wide AVID college readiness system. So we shouldn't just see impact in the elective, we should see some impact outside of the elective as well. As long as students are attending that AVID school, there should be some school-wide impact. What are AVID secondary site certification levels? Okay, so depending on the level of implementation of AVID at each site, they're awarded a certain certification level, and it ranges from a non-certified site all the way to a school-wide site of distinction. For this particular study, we had one certified site. We had 3 total AVID schools. We had 1 certified site, and the other 2 schools were non-certified sites. What is WICR? Okay, WICR is a collection of best teaching practices, right? Strategies that support student learning in any classroom on campus. And WICR is a school-wide approach to instruction. Operationalizing these best practice strategies in every classroom across campus will be the vision of an effective school-wide AVID college readiness system. Taking it a little further, Daryl, what does WICR actually stand for? What does this acronym mean? It primarily revolves around these particular skills. So we have writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading. So teachers and schools will adopt strategies around these core areas to help build students' ability to process information, to build comprehension, and to demonstrate their mastery and proficiency on not only state assessments, but college and career readiness skills throughout the school year. Chapter 3 is all about methodology. Let's take a look at our research null hypotheses. The null hypothesis for research question 1 states that there's no statistically significant difference in student achievement on state assessments, primarily Math 3, English 3, Chemistry final exam as well, for AVID students and non-AVID students. Null hypothesis 2 states that there is no statistically significant difference between the graduation rate and ACT composite scores of students enrolled in AVID schools when compared to students who are not enrolled in AVID schools. And the null hypothesis for research question 3 states that there is no statistically significant difference in ISS, OSS, and attendance rates of students enrolled in AVID schools when compared to those enrolled in non-AVID schools. Let's check out the research design. This was a comparison group study. This was a summative program evaluation. And as a result, I took a quantitative method approach to my research. I conducted a comprehensive comparison of high school juniors at 5 schools within a school district. Particularly 3 AVID schools and 2 non-AVID schools with similar demographics were selected. Continuing with the research design, I compared student performance measures in math, reading, and science using the NCFE, EOC, and ACT assessments. I compared district data for graduation, suspensions, and attendance. I also analyzed these comparisons to investigate whether there was a statistically significant difference in student performance measures when we're comparing students enrolled in AVID high schools versus students not enrolled in AVID high schools. Sample populations. So students fit in the criteria in both schools. It was about 900 total students that I was able to pull from the data I was able to further sample randomly 150 juniors from each high school. And students sampled were enrolled in their high schools for 4 consecutive years. So if you were sampled for this study, you would have had to have been enrolled for 4 consecutive years as a senior, but we only used junior year data. Avid elective students sampled for this study were in the program for 3 consecutive years. So only students who had 3 consecutive years in the Avid program were used for that purpose. And we'll talk about our groups. Data collection and sources. So all data was collected from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools Department of Research and Accountability. Data was in the Excel format. Data was analyzed using Microsoft Excel. Thanks to Mrs. Dr. Bowles for teaching me that process. I'm grateful to her for that. The Math 3 EOC, English 3 NCFE, and Chemistry NCFE, and ACT assessment results from 2017 and 2018 were used. And student graduation, attendance, and suspension data were used as well. Ethical considerations for this study. Number 1, I ensured a high level of quality and integrity during this research. I would like to think that I took a scrupulous approach in analyzing the data and producing the results. My research was independent, impartial, and will respect confidentiality of all those who participated and sampled. To remain ethical and unbiased, I removed my school, West Mecklenburg High School, from the original study. West Meck is an Avid site of distinction. And this was done to avoid any bias from the results and to remove myself as an active administrator in this school from the study. Chapter 4, let's talk about our results. Let's begin by examining a breakdown of each sample group overall. Let's start off with our treatment group, which is represented by our Avid elective students. And 150 total students were sampled from the 3 Avid schools selected in the study. Next, we have control group A, which is represented by our non-Avid students attending in non-Avid schools. I was able to sample about 300 total students who fit the criteria, but I further sampled randomly 150 students to make the group equal to the treatment group. And lastly, we have control group B, which represents our non-Avid elective students who actually attend Avid schools. And there were 450 total students who fit this criteria, but I was able to further sample randomly 150 students in equal groups from each Avid school to represent this control group. Just want to give you a moment to revisit research question 1 before we dive into the results. All right, so we're going to jump in a comparison of EOC and NCFE assessment data. Let's start off with Math 3 results. If we take a look at our Math 3 results, we see that our treatment group, sorry about that, we see that our treatment group scored slightly higher than control group A, non-Avid students in non-Avid schools. However, we see that control group B, our non-Avid elective students who attend Avid schools, had a closer comparison with our treatment group for Math 3. If we're taking a look at our English 3 results, we see a slightly different pattern here, but we do see our treatment group of Avid students having a slightly higher average than our control group A students, non-avid students in non-avid schools. But our lower group here, we see has the lower level average are our non-elective students in our avid schools. And I probably should have said this prior, a one-way ANOVA was conducted to produce these results and these averages. Chemistry results. So here we see our treatment group has a slightly higher average than control group A, non-avid students. And then we see a lower result produced by our non-elective students who are attending avid schools. And just a brief summary of research question 1. First and foremost, the results are not statistically significant. However, avid elective students had slightly higher EOC and NCFE scores. Non-avid students had slightly higher English 3 and chemistry scores than non-avid elective students attending avid schools. Let's take a moment to revisit research question 2 before we dive into the results. All right. Going into the results for research question 2, we're starting off with our graduation rate comparison. Okay, turn your attention to the far left here. You'll see that we have our sample schools listed here, beginning with avid school A, B, and C. And then we have our non-avid schools A and B represented as well. To the right, you can see a table with the years listed at the top and the graduation rates for each respective school pertaining to that year. And in the far right column over here, you'll see the 4-year average of each school's graduation rate. Now, to compare this further, I took the average of our 3 avid schools' graduation rates, and it equaled 92%. I also took the average of our 2 non-avid schools' graduation rates, and it equaled 92% as well. We can see here that 1 non-avid school had a slightly lower graduation rate than all the other schools. However, the school was still selected based off demographics. So the demographics are the same in terms of the student populations at this school compared to the others. As we shift into the ACT composite score comparison results, we see a slightly different pattern here, okay? Before we saw our treatment group scoring higher on all those state assessments. Now we see a little difference here. We see our non-avid elective students or in non-avid schools, this is control group A, right? They have a slightly higher average than both populations that attend avid schools. If we were to take a summary or look at a summary of research question 2, basically it breaks down that average graduation rates between 2016 and 2019 were about 92% for both avid and non-avid schools, so there was no difference seen there. ACT composite score comparison results were not statistically significant, according to the one-way ANOVA. And as a result, non-avid students had a slightly higher ACT composite score than students attending avid schools. So we saw a different pattern there. Let's take a look at research question 3. All right, so as we jump into research question 3, we're going to start with days of ISS averages for each sample group. As we take a look at this, we see that our non-avid students attending non-avid schools had slightly more days of ISS than both groups attending avid schools. We also see slightly higher days of ISS for our AVID elective students, our treatment group, as compared to our non-elective group in AVID schools. So AVID students are going to ISS slightly more. However, on the contrary, this is good in relation to the average days of OSS. On average, we see that our non-AVID students attending non-AVID schools, control group B, are experiencing more days of OSS, precisely one more day of OSS than our AVID students. And then we also see our non-elective students within AVID schools are slightly behind them. But our treatment group has the lowest average of out-of-school suspension. And lastly, let's take a look at attendance, right? Who's missing the most days out of school? If we look here, we see that our control group A, non-AVID students attending non-AVID schools, are missing more days of school than both populations within AVID schools. There's a 4-day difference between AVID elective students and non-AVID students altogether. And there's about a 2 to 3 day difference between non-elective students attending AVID schools versus non-AVID. But we do see the non-AVID population exceeding both populations within an AVID school. If we were to look at a summary of research question 3, we can tell that there was a slightly higher average with ISS, OSS, and days absent for non-AVID students when compared to students who attend AVID schools. Okay, so now let's progress into chapter 5. Briefly, let's talk about recommendations for future research. First and foremost, my recommendation would be to expand the sample size of schools beyond the district and into the state. I feel like the more students and the more schools that we can make a part of the study, the more valid our data becomes, and the more we can generalize it to larger populations and determine a greater effect or non-effect of the AVID program. Using higher certified sites, right? So future research could also compare the achievement of emerging sites, sites of distinction, and demonstration sites compared to non-AVID sites as well to give us some more data. Also include other variables such as SAT scores, student surveys, and really hit the SEL piece. AVID seems to have a great effect on SEL, which may also impact student learning. So I think future research should definitely go into that direction. Recommendations for future research continue. When selecting participants from non-AVID schools, I think we should dive into 8th grade math achievement data a little more, and not only I guess associating it with math, it could be English as well, reading data as well. But we want to create more comparable participant groups that are on the same freshman track as our AVID elective students. So we want to have that comparable data from middle school to better select students for our population groups when we're creating our comparisons in the future. Also, sample participants based on subgroups like race and gender to determine AVID's impact in those areas. That will give us some more data as well. And lastly, examine junior year data of AVID and non-AVID students nationally, as well as research why students attending AVID schools have lower suspension rates. That kind of brings me back to the notion of SEL being an area that future researchers can go in or proceed in to expand their knowledge on Avid's impact overall in their school district, in their school, and the program in general. And just linking everything back to our theoretical framework for constructivism theory, comprehensive learning using the core high school curriculum and state standards was a part of the study. The use of state assessments to measure student knowledge over time, and the student experience in an Avid school versus a non-Avid school while constructing knowledge associated with constructivism. Metacognitive theory, Avid best practice strategies associate with building metacognition, right? Participants had to demonstrate their ability to apply task and strategy variables to high stakes tests, strategies and tasks they learned throughout the school year. And they have to constantly think about their thinking in terms to evaluate how they're performing, adjust it, ask the teacher for help, things of that nature to ensure that they're performing well on state assessments and demonstrating mastery. And last but not least, Marzano's theory, going back to those 9 high-yield strategies, they associate with Avid's Wicker practices. The coaching and implementation of these strategies, however, falls on the accountability of each school, and that determines the school's certification level. That plays into the certification level as well. To conclude this defense, I would just like to state that I was able to compare assessment data, graduation rates, attendance data, and suspension data between students enrolled in 3 Avid schools and 2 non-Avid schools. I used the quantitative data method, and the data mentioned above was analyzed using Microsoft Excel. And this data was provided by the CMS Office of Accountability. Lastly, I found no statistically significant difference when comparing data for each research question. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and at this time, I'll take any.
All right. Are there any questions from the committee or anything that we need clarification from Darryl?
I have a couple. Good job, Darryl. You've done a good job on this work. Proud of the work you've done here. I do have a couple of questions related to your methodology. You don't describe your random sampling method in chapter 3, I don't believe. How did you go about achieving these random samples that you presented and discussed?
Yes, sir.
The randomization.
Yes, sir. So in breaking down the random sampling, once I had the major groups, I was able to pick students randomly once I had the groups broken down. So I want to say I had 900 total, and like for one population, it was 450. And from that 450, I was able to sample even populations from each school. So for example, non-Avid school A versus non-Avid school B, I would take an even population from Avid school A, an even population from Avid school B to create that particular control group. And it was taken randomly. So it's just randomly sampled kids, not looking at any information or data, just randomly taking the names and creating a number to create the group.
Darryl, go ahead, Dr. Bowles.
Did you use some methodology to do that randomization? Did you use random number table? How did you do that?
It was just basically every other student.
Okay.
Every other student, and just taking it that way. Nothing complex with it.
Okay. Now I'll go to a section place in here. Hang on a second. I'll get to the page. I apologize. The page numbers don't show up for me the same on when I look at it on the computer. I see your header in your footer, but not your page numbers. But you talk. I'm trying to go to the place here. You talk about. I happen to be on right at figure 6 on page 77, actual page 77. You talk about as it pertains to English 3, the Avid elective students had a 5% higher average than the non-Avid students. It's not clear in there in that section whether you're talking about an average or means to me. And so I would just point you back to that to take a look at that. If it's a mean in those sections where you're talking about that, probably need to use the word mean. If it's not, if it's some kind of other average, then you need to clarify what that is, I think, in there. You report, you acknowledge that you are involved with Avid, which is a good thing. I know you've been involved with Avid. How would you respond to someone, and I think you've done training for Avid.
Yes, sir.
How do you respond to someone who reads your research and suggests that you have a bias or a vested interest in this study? I think part of it you can counter with the results that there was not much of a difference, certainly, but how would you respond to that, to somebody who would question the validity of your research because of your prior involvement in Avid? I think you'll have opportunities to present this research, certainly in CMS and other places. And I can imagine somebody say, well, wait a minute, Dr. Potts, you got a vested interest here. You were researching something that you were involved in. How will you respond to that?
Yes, sir. So my involvement in the Avid program is one thing. However, the research is for expanding the knowledge of school districts overall, whether that be the use of Avid or some other program that may better fit their school. Being that I am a part of Avid, it did, I guess, pique my curiosity in terms of how effective is the program? Will it remain a viable program for school districts to use? And in conducting such a research study, I can determine, or we can determine, if we should move forward with Avid or if we should go in a different direction, despite my involvement. I think that my involvement is mainly around staff development and just trying to help teachers acquire best practice strategies to grow their students. However, there are other ways to do that as well. There are other programs as well. Avid is just one of those programs. And my involvement is primarily around improving students overall and not directly trying to promote a particular program, but overall just trying to help school districts better select programs, and this could be one of those options.
And one last question, I'll let Dr. Bouchard. You're going to get opportunities again to talk about this research. You may be at a conference and you have a minute or two to tell somebody about your research. What was your dissertation about? What is your 60-second overall conclusion from your research that you would say that you discovered here?
Overall, I would say that Avid is a program that has had a track record of success. Through this research, we see only slight gains. And I think that may be associated with the level of certification at certain sites, how well strategies have been taught to teachers and facilitated with fidelity. However, if school districts want to adopt a program, Avid can be one of those programs. However, they really need to investigate the level of fidelity in which is being implemented, and not just this program, other programs as well. I think the more embedded a program and its practices are within a school district, the better results that you will yield. And I think within this particular study, I think Avid probably lends more support to a school district in the area of SEL versus academics, based off what I was able to find with Avid students primarily having lower suspension rates, lower absenteeism rates, and then there was only a slight difference in academic achievement, even though those were not statistically significant.
Thank you.
All right, Daryl. Hey, nice work. I really enjoyed the study. I enjoyed your well-written dissertation. I got a few statements and then a few questions, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Hey, what a critical topic. This is certainly due a solution sooner than later. So I appreciate you noticing that and addressing that. It was interesting for me to learn there are 153 Avid sites in North Carolina, about 20,000 students attending that. That was of interest to me, and I did not realize it was a K-12 program. So you did spell that out for us. Can be a K-12 program throughout the state. And I really like that social and emotional aspect and support that you mentioned. I think that's going to be some of your ties to the ISS and the OSS connection, maybe keeping kids engaged with it. You mentioned fidelity of the program and implementation of the program. And I found myself trying to better understand, is AVID a school-wide program or was it not a school-wide program in some? So when you mentioned fidelity of the program, do you think it affected you that some schools had different certification levels of an AVID program when you looked at them? I think you mentioned yours was of the highest level of certification, and 2 of the 3 were, I think you even said non-certified. Do you think that had an effect on your results with fidelity?
Yes, sir. I think that the higher level that a site is certified can yield higher results. I think it kind of goes back to the training and certification of teachers, how well they've internalized those best practice strategies, and that reflects in the certification. But most importantly, that reflects in the classroom. So if teachers are more equipped with these best practice strategies and they have a full understanding and the school is rated in a higher certification, nationally we will probably have more results or higher results. However, this also kind of shades light on, school systems that are beginning the program. So if you're beginning the program, you can still have some very slight gains, but it will also inform you on areas to improve your implementation to try to increase those gains over time.
So, okay, but yes, and I agree. And just us talking here, if you ran the West Met numbers, which is the highest certification level versus a lower, you would expect to see more positive results in your measurement. Is that just according to your? I'm trying to get to the heart of. Some of them were not certified or credentialed to be an AVID school, but yet we included them in an AVID number. So just something for me to think about while I was reading that, and maybe something that you might want to mention. Different levels of certification may have played something out in your numbers. And I noticed you mentioned that some of the students had at least been part of the AVID program for 3 years. Mm-hmm. Do we know if any of them had been a part of the program longer than 3 years? Is it possible they had this in elementary, middle, and high, or does the 3 schools that you looked at, the feeder programs, does not have an AVID program? Does it start with them in freshman year as a high school student?
In some cases, students may have middle school AVID programs that feed into high schools. That was something I didn't look at in this particular case. I was only able to look at a certain number of AVID school sites that actually employ the program. And I had to make a selection out of those particular sites available to me that were similar in demographics. So it kind of limited me in that aspect. However, to answer your question, yes, some schools do have middle school feeder programs, but that wasn't examined with this particular study.
Right, and I get that. I know you can't answer all the questions, of course, we're all going to throw at you, but that would be an interesting thread to follow for an extended study. And then I love that you talked about student surveys. You, like me, I did a quantitative study as well, and I found out when I was done with it, hey, I had some qualitative questions that would have been really nice to have thrown in there as well. So, but I do like your idea of actually talking to the students and doing some student surveys potentially. What did AVID program mean to you as a student? So again, I enjoyed the study and appreciate your time spent on it. Mr. Stone, that's all I have right now.
Well, thank you. And Daryl, the one comment I wanted to make to the committee too is what I think that when working with Daryl and I saw this is that, yes, the academics seems to be a little bit on the disappointing side. It's not really what you'd want to be able to go out and say, hey, AVID is a great program for improving math, reading, and writing. But what I think that the future study, and Daryl mentioned this, is that the SEC connection, because if they are improving their graduation rates or staying stable with the district, which is good, or hopefully at some point as the fidelity comes and as the program is more institutionalized and people really begin to understand it and apply it, I think that the long-term effect would be that not only would it improve SEC, but it would also improve some of the academics too. Given time, I think that the more kids are in school, unless they're suspended, of course, that's obviously going to be an impact. So, and Daryl mentioned that. So, and the other piece too, Daryl, is the fidelity of the program. I know that you have a buy-in into AVID, but I think as Dr. Hoshard said, that when you really look into whether or not it's the fidelity of it and how it's being implemented and how teachers really embrace it, it certainly could be something that could impact it too. But I thought you did a great job. Are there any other questions or comments for Daryl? All right, Daryl, I'm going to try something tricky. I'm going to create breakout rooms, and I'm going to move Dr. Bowles and Dr. Hoshard and I to a breakout room. And I think I can do this. Let's see.